Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Worker and Union Solidarity with China, Why and How. Great to see you all. I've been looking forward to this very important event. I'm here with Professor Kent Wang, the featured speaker of the session, and my co-moderator, Joey Hartman. My name is Xinying Hu. I'm co-hosting this event from Vancouver, situated on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I teach in the Labor Studies program at Simon Fraser University. One of the courses I've been teaching is Labor in China, in which worker and union solidarity is a major topic. I participated and translated for the union delegation to China in 2014 through the British Columbia Federation of Labor and the Vancouver and District Labor Council. I am so looking forward to listening to Professor Kent Wang's presentation on worker and union solidarity issues. Welcome, Professor Wang. It's so great to see you. Now I'd like to invite over today's co-host, Joey Hartman. I will turn it over to Joey.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm joining today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen people on what is now called Main Island, British Columbia. And my own history is that I am retired from the full-time position of president of the Vancouver and District Labor Council and have had the privilege of leading two delegations to China, one of the ones that was just mentioned by Xinying, and another one, so Vancouver and District Labor Council and the BC Federation of Labor. And we also at the Vancouver and District Labor Council routinely welcomed groups of labor delegates from China who were in Canada for building relationship, but also to be learning negotiations and other skill building. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Xinying. You're muted.
Thank you, Joey. I'd like to take this moment to recognize the sponsors of this event, the Project Canada-China Focus and Simon Fraser University's Morgan Center for Labor Research. Canada-China Focus was founded last year as a non-partisan and anti-racist space for conversations on critical issues related to Canada-China relations. It is hosted by the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and the Center for Global Studies at the University of Victoria here in Canada, who are also co-sponsors of tonight's event. Jessica McWicker of Canada-China Focus and Kayla Klim of the Center for Global Studies have been working very hard setting up this event and are with us tonight, handling technical support. Thank you, Jessica and Kayla. I'd like to give a shout out to Kathy Walker and John Price on the advisory committee of Canada-China Focus, who helped put this event together. Thank you all who are joining us tonight from Canada, China, and also the United States, Europe, and the other parts of the world. Wherever you are, welcome. A few notes on the webinar today. The event is live on Zoom and Facebook. You can share this webinar on social media. The webinar will be recorded and made available after the event through the Canada-China Focus website. Please put your questions for the speaker in the Q&A by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Chat to introduce yourself through the chat button at the bottom of the screen. For technical reasons, chat will be closed at 4:10. Please introduce yourself there now. Lastly, captions are available for attendees using it by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. We aim to conclude the session in 1 hour. Now I'd like to invite Joey back. Over to you, Joey.
Thank you. So it's my great honor to be introducing our speaker tonight, Kent Wong. And he won't remember it, but I think I first met Kent in San Francisco in 1995 when I was attending a rally for healthcare that crossed the Great Bridge and in San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, and then was attached to a conference where Kent was a speaker. And I went and bent his ear for a while after his presentation because I was so impressed with what he said and how he said it. And among his many other achievements, Kent has been the founding president of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. He was at one time a staff attorney for the SEIU and was deeply involved with the Justice for Janitors campaign, which was so groundbreaking at the time. And is currently the director of the UCLA Labor Center, which you can see behind him there in his screenshot. We've asked Kent today to speak about the relationships of unions with China, and he is well known and highly respected for advancing solidarity efforts, particularly between US and Chinese labor movements. And I will say that it has not been an easy path. I'm referring to, I'm going to quote briefly from an article he wrote in 2000, so 22 years ago, with Elaine Bernard as his co-author. Many of you will know Elaine from her time at Simon Fraser University and then Harvard. And the article was titled Rethinking the China Campaign. And briefly, I'll just say it describes the unsuccessful attempt by the AFL-CIO in the United States to block the US approval of the PNTR, the permanent normal trade relations status for China. And this was the prelude to China joining the World Trade Organization in 2001. And briefly, I'm just going to quote from it because I think it resonates so strongly with where we still are today. It says, while the campaign was launched with the intent of promoting internationalism and avoiding China bashing, we fear that the ultimate impact of the campaign has been to fuel Cold War politics, to encourage an unholy alliance with the right wing, and has resulted in racially offensive messaging. As well, the campaign weakened the strong anti-corporate and international solidarity focus coming out of the anti-WTO protests in Seattle and dissipated some of the positive momentum that Seattle had won. The main threat to economic security, dignity, and human rights of US workers, and I will add Canadian, is domestic and global corporations and their institutions, the WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank. We need to keep our eyes on the prize, move beyond the Cold War, and move beyond unilateralism and move towards genuine international labor solidarity. 22 years ago today, and that article still resonates so strongly today. So now let's hear directly from Kent Wong. Thank you. Over to you, Kent.
Thank you so much, Joey. So great to see you again and to be with my good friends in the Vancouver and Canadian labor movement. And thank you, Xinying, for your kind introduction and your support, and my good friends at Simon Fraser University. This is a very important time to be discussing this issue of building worker-to-worker and union-to-union solidarity between the United States and China at a time of heightened international tension, conflict, and war, and also at a time of a global pandemic, which has exposed massive class and racial inequities that have only gotten worse during the pandemic, as billionaires have made billions in profits during the pandemic, and the so-called essential workers who have been at the front lines of providing critically needed services and assistance have been treated anything but essential and have essentially been treated by multinational corporations as disposable workers. So it is in that context that I think that the necessity to improve dialogue, communication, and relationships, not only between the US and China, the two largest economies in the world, and the two largest trading partners, but I think it is critical to improve global cooperation, global partnerships. So I have put together a short PowerPoint to highlight my presentation today so that you won't be subjected to a nonstop 20 minutes of a talking head, and you'll see some images on the screen. I have been teaching at UCLA now for 30 years, and so under the pandemic, one of the skills that I have acquired is putting together PowerPoints, and so I hope that you enjoy the one I've put together for you today. So this is a PowerPoint on labor solidarity with China. And as Joey indicated, I am the director of the UCLA Labor Center, and I also served as the founding president of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. And we are actually celebrating our 30th anniversary this coming weekend on May Day 2022. This will mark the 30th anniversary of the founding of the very first national Asian American labor organization, APALA, that is still thriving 30 years later. So I think it's important to anchor this conversation in the long legacy of anti-China, anti-Chinese, and white supremacist sentiment that has been, unfortunately, a core feature of the US labor movement for generations. Samuel Gompers, who was the founding president of the American Federation of Labor, was a cigar maker by profession, and his industry was impacted by the rise of Chinese immigrant labor to the United States during the 19th century. And Chinese workers were forced into some of the most difficult, menial, and low-paid jobs, many that historically had been identified as women's work. And so Chinese workers entered the cigar making industry, the laundry industry, the restaurant industry, and the garment industry that were historically considered women's work and were paid inferior wages. And it is ironic that over 150 years later, still some of those employment patterns exist to this day. Samuel Gompers said, racial differences between American whites and Asiatics will never be overcome. The superior whites have to exclude the inferior Asiatics by law, or if necessary, by force of arms. So not only was Samuel Gompers the first president of the American Federation of Labor, he was a lifelong opponent of Chinese migration to the United States, and he was a lifelong advocate of racist, discriminatory immigration policies that not only restricted Chinese and Asian migration to the United States, but also limited their rights when they came to this country. And this is a cartoon, a visual image that is a reflection of the anti-Chinese movement that the US labor movement helped to promote. And on the left, we see this ugly caricature of a Chinese worker with a pigtail, and he has many outstretched arms simultaneously in the garment industry, sewing clothes, rolling cigars, working in the trades and in manufacturing and in the building trades. And then on the left, you see him holding this big sack of money because, of course, the Chinese workers were taking money that would go to other people. On the right side of the screen, you see a group of unemployed white workers who are the victims of the hordes of Chinese who were taking their jobs. And the caption of this racist cartoon was, "What shall we do with our boys?" So the American Federation of Labor has a long history of racial exclusion. They supported and were advocates of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which for the first time in US history excluded an entire group of people based on their national origin, the Chinese. And it not only blocked widespread migration from China for generations, it also was extended to apply to other groups from Asia, subsequently Japanese, Filipinos, Koreans, and South Asians, and Southeast Asians, and it also barred citizenship rights for Chinese brought to this country. In addition, however, the American Federation of Labor barred US union membership to Chinese and Asian American workers. In 1905, when the Japanese Mexican Labor Association successfully organized one of the first multiracial unions of farm workers in California, they applied for a charter membership with the American Federation of Labor. Samuel Gompers wrote back and said, "We will accept your charter membership to the American Federation of Labor, provided that you exclude membership of Japanese who are barred from joining US unions." And Lizarras, the Mexican-American secretary of the Japanese Mexican Labor Association, wrote back an impassioned appeal to Samuel Gompers, saying that we have fought side by side, Mexican and Japanese workers. That is the only way we prevailed over our fight against US capital. It would be a betrayal of the cause of unionism to turn our back on those who stood with us. This appeal was ignored, and the Japanese Mexican Labor Association was never allowed to join the American Federation of Labor. Subsequent policies of the AFL-CIO included an embrace of white supremacy, the establishment of segregated unions where Black, Latino, and other workers of color were barred from joining white unions, and anti-immigration policies that have maintained for many, many years. And so, although the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed in 1882, racially exclusive policies existed on the US labor laws until the 1960s for more than 80 years, and were only reversed because of the Black-led civil rights movement of Dr. Martin Luther King and others that challenged racially discriminatory laws, including immigration policies. The AFL-CIO also embraced Cold War policies. The AFL-CIO purged communist and socialist members during the 1950s McCarthy era and adopted anti-communist clauses within many union constitutions. The AFL-CIO joined the US government in their global campaign against communism, not only opposing China, but also supporting the US war in Vietnam, the blockade of Cuba, support for right-wing dictatorships in Central America, and opposition to Nelson Mandela in South Africa because of his ties to the South African Communist Party. The AFL-CIO led a series of anti-China campaigns, including opposition to Chinese entry into the World Trade Organization, demanding trade sanctions against China, accusing China of currency manipulation, and calling for the boycott of Chinese goods. And this included holding anti-China rallies with right-wing politicians. At one rally hosted by the Teamsters Union in Washington, D.C., they pulled up right-wing commentary Pat Buchanan to announce before hundreds of union members, we have to get tough on China. We have to tell China, no ticky, no laundry. This is a direct quote from Pat Buchanan, who was using derogatory anti-Chinese rhetoric against the trade policies with China. Labor's anti-China campaign helped Trump build support among white workers. So anti-China and racist campaigns have a consequence. The anti-China sentiment generated by US labor unions directly contributed to white workers embracing the Trump agenda. US union leaders, especially in the Midwest Rust Belt, blamed China, not US corporations, for the loss of US jobs. Conservative union leaders also blamed immigrants for US job loss, embraced hyper-nationalism and US military expansion, and opposed climate change policies. As a consequence, many US union members and white workers overall embraced Trump's anti-China, protectionist, and racist policies. These positions have consequence with regard to poisoning U.S. working class, and in providing the foundation for the Trump analysis to take a foothold, especially among white workers in the United States. And in the 2016 election that resulted in the Trump victory, although Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by more than 3 million votes, it was 70,000 votes in 3 critical states, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, that flipped the election and resulted in the election of Donald Trump in 2016. These 3 states had voted for Obama in 2012, and right to work laws were enacted in these states, anti-union policies were enacted, and those 70,000 votes in those 3 states made the difference of a Trump victory in 2016. And I submit that the right-wing rhetoric advanced by some of the union leaders from those states directly contributed to the Trump victory. Fortunately, in 2020, with a robust labor community alliance, with a mobilization in those critical states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, we were able to retake those states, and Trump was resoundingly defeated both in the electoral vote and in the popular vote. Once again, he continues to perpetuate lies that he won the election, but this is the electoral map of 2020. I want to say that, I led by talking about the foundation of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance back in 1992 on May 1st. And this is such a timely conversation because this very weekend we are celebrating our 30th anniversary. And I traveled throughout the country to mobilize Asian American workers to establish the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, the first Asian American worker organization in the US. And it was ironic because when we gathered these Asian American union activists and workers, and for the first time met in the AFL-CIO headquarters in Washington, DC, the staff had never before seen so many Asian faces in the AFL-CIO headquarters. So many people peeked their head out of into the hallways and said, what country are they from? Because the assumption was that surely this group of Asians at the AFL-CIO headquarters must be from a visiting country, because we've never seen Asian American workers here in the House of Labor. And when we were planning to launch the APALA back on May 1st, 1992, they assigned us to meet in the Samuel Gompers room. And so this irony was not lost on any of us who knew the sordid history of the American Federation of Labor. And as we convened in the Samuel Gompers room, we proclaimed Samuel Gompers must be turning over in his grave, knowing that Chinese and Asian American union activists were gathering to establish a national organization which he had tried for his entire life to keep out of the US labor movement. So APALA, from its very inception, was confronted with a crisis because the AFL-CIO wanted us to embrace a longstanding Cold War anti-China position at the founding convention in 1992. And in fact, a deputy sent by Lane Kirkland met with me, because I was chairing the national convention, to ensure that we would embrace this anti-China policy. And I bluntly told him, well, this is a democratic organization. We are part of the US labor movement, and we will take a vote on whether our membership would support this or not. But I guarantee you, if you bring this issue before our convention, we are going to vote it down. And they were shocked that we would not fall in line and embrace their anti-China Cold War policy with regard to China. APALA has challenged the Cold War policies of the AFL-CIO since our inception. We invited in 2001 leaders of the Chinese labor movement to speak at our national convention. This was a violation of the policies of the AFL-CIO. And since then, for the last 20 years, we have been developing labor exchanges between unions of China and the US, and also between unions and workers of Vietnam and in the US. And so we absolutely challenged the Cold War policies of the AFL-CIO. We also challenged their anti-immigrant policies, which were a source of tremendous discomfort and disagreement among the leaders of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. In 2002, I organized a delegation and brought the president of the Service Employees Union, Andy Stern, to come to China. In 2005, we organized a delegation led by the then president of the Change to Win Federation and Andy Stern that had split from the AFL-CIO, and Change to Win developed the very first union-to-union partnership between the Change to Win Federation and the All China Federation of Trade Unions in 2005. In 2007, I brought a delegation led by Maria Elena Durazo, who is now a state senator in California, to establish formal relationships with the Shanghai Trade Union Municipal Council. And these exchanges yielded direct and immediate benefit, not only in terms of improving communication, dialogue, and understanding between unions and workers in our two countries, but we had a special conference organized in California to educate leaders of the All China Federation of Trade Unions about Walmart, about the anti-union, anti-worker policies that have been so rampant within Walmart stores throughout the United States. One of the largest corporations in the world has successfully blocked any unionization efforts in the United States. And yet on the basis of this conversation, dialogue, and conference, ACFTU have since then successfully unionized 107,000 Walmart workers in 411 stores throughout China. In addition, our delegations have brought union leaders from the US to meet with both the CRRC, the China Railroad Corporation in Changchun, northern China, and the BYD, the electric bus and car manufacturers in Shenzhen, China. And as a consequence of those meetings, we were able to secure project labor agreements from these two Chinese corporations, as well as union neutrality. And so currently we have the workers of CRRC and BYD in the United States, represented by the Electrical Workers Union, the IBEW, and the Sheet Metal Workers, who have successfully organized and now represent workers in these two plants. This is a photo from the China Federation of California Federation of Teachers and the Shanghai Teachers Union. This is also a partnership that has been in existence more than 15 years. And we continue before the pandemic to bring delegations of teachers and education workers from California to Shanghai on a regular basis. So a breakthrough came with the AFL-CIO in the year 2013. The AFL-CIO invited representatives from the All China Federation of Trade Unions to come to the 2013 AFL-CIO convention that was held in Los Angeles. I spoke at a AFL-CIO convention workshop on US-China labor solidarity, and we had attending the workshop several national union presidents of the United States, as well as representatives from the AFL-CIO. That same year in 2013, President Richard Trumka traveled to China. He was the first AFL-CIO president in history to do so. And over the last 2 decades, we have had the presidents of SEIU, the United Auto Workers, the United Food and Commercial Workers, the Teamsters, the Electrical Workers, and the Sheet Metal Workers, who have all traveled to China. However, the unfortunate reality is that relationships have stalled. Increased tension and conflict between the US and China has made these types of exchanges more challenging and more difficult. The implosion of Change to Win meant that the partnership between Change to Win and ACFTU was shelved, and a lot of the ambitious global solidarity initiatives of Change to Win no longer exist. The AFL-CIO support for the Hong Kong democracy movement created friction and tension between the AFL-CIO and the ACFTU. The AFL-CIO to date, unfortunately, lacks a cohesive international agenda. They do some extraordinary and progressive work through the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center and the AFL-CIO International Department, but unfortunately, there is still not a clear cohesion to the global solidarity work, and there has not been a forceful and clear break from Cold War policies of years past, especially when it comes to China, Vietnam, and Cuba. And unfortunately, we also have US right-wing union leaders, especially from manufacturing unions and building trades, that still promote protectionism, anti-communism, and white supremacy. So this anti-China campaign has been of a special concern to the Asian American community, and anti-China campaigns have promoted racist slogans and have encouraged a new wave of anti-Asian hate and anti-Asian violence throughout the United States. Trump called COVID-19 the China virus, the Wuhan virus, and Kung flu. This was repeated and echoed by Fox News and other right-wing politicians and right-wing media outlets across the country. And there has been a sharp rise in the first year since the outbreak of COVID, close to 4,000 documented instances of anti-Asian hate and violence. And this is horribly underreported. So we know that when close to 4,000 people report these instances, the true rate of hate crimes and anti-Asian acts of violence has been dramatically higher than that. In March of 2021, 6 Asian American women were murdered in Atlanta by a white gunman who tracked down 3 different Asian-owned businesses in order to attack and kill 6 Asian American women. And one of the legal representatives, police representatives on the day of the shooting said that the shooter was having a bad day and completely discounted the role of anti-Asian animus and racism in these hate crimes. And even the mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, has been subjected to racist attacks for encouraging public health policies, and she has been called Mayor Wuhan. And if you look at any of the news feeds coming out of Boston, when Michelle Wu is quoted, you would be shocked at the level of vitriol and anti-Asian hate that Asian American elected officials are subjected to this day. I wanted to show a short music video because I don't want to paint a negative picture of what is happening. I also want to promote the inspiring resistance and activism and organizing that is also taking place. So let me share with you a short music video called We Belong. And this is actually a song that was written by Asian American pioneer singer-songwriter Chris Ijima, a good friend of mine, but has been updated to the current issue of anti-Asian violence. So let me show you this short 3-minute video on We Belong.
I'm here, grew up on the shores of America. Open up shop, ran stores in America. Wash windows, clean floors in America. Only trust me with your chores in America. Just need one open door in America. Cried when we elected 44 for America. My family's here, fought wars for America. On TV, just a whore for America. I get the memo, this is your America. Take my money, tax forms in America. Take a food, charge more in America. Use a culture for decor in America. History that you can't ignore. America, I'm the leader I was looking for. America, never silent, keeping score. America, and it's time I needed more. We're still here, we're going strong, and we're getting tired of proving we belong. We're still here, we're going
what's changed since Vincent Chin, the difference just names. Xiao Jia Dao Yao Sun Jia, know these names. Hyun Jung Sun Jung Young, we have names. Victims, silence, evicted from our lives, cause our skin is the color they love to villainize. What if it's food, movies, or women they love to fetishize? What if it's COVID-19, then China virus. Fuck these colonizers, calling us outsiders. We built this country too, and they built it alongside us. One generation, two, generation three, to the young generation, you generate me. So T, Tayo, Anwar, and Chucky, and anyone that feels like a guest in their country, and everyone has ever lost a body to the struggle. No, you're not alone. I promise all of my people, y'all, we love you when we're here.
We're going strong, and we're getting tired of proving we belong. We're still here, we're going strong, and we're getting tired of proving we belong. Proving we belong.
I've washed the clothes, and these hands have served the food heaven knows. And my neck has felt the mob's rope and has been behind barbed wire. My arms have nailed down railroad track, our back has been for hire. And these hands have fought injustice and the soul is on fire. We belong to each other, magnitude and bond. Black feminist scholarship, indigenous songs belong at the center like ethnic studies. Be the Robin Hood and invest in us. We be living pleasure acts abundantly. Abolition is healing our suffering, belonging our purpose to the ones in need. Cause if one ain't got it, ain't no one free. I speak from the streets of Lenape Ho King. All my relations need reparations. Power to the people, our disposition belong to the land with First Nations permission. Maktub, the word that was written when we decolonize. We belong to wisdom, the cry for liberty, the right side of history. Overstand the bigotry, it's never really finished. See here,
even when the smoke we're going strong, and we're getting tired of proving we belong.
we keep holding
We're still here,
even after all these
we're
years.
going strong, and we're getting tired of proving we belong.
We keep
Proving we belong.
So I hope you enjoyed that music video, We Belong. And the words were written by Asian American singer-songwriter Chris Ijima. So in my view, the anti-China campaigns undermine labor solidarity. US union leaders have blamed China for the loss of US jobs while letting US corporations off the hook. Tim Ryan, a labor-endorsed Democratic candidate who is running for US Senate in Ohio, is launching a major media campaign attacking China as the cause of US job loss. And you can Google it and you can check it out on YouTube. It is so racist and offensive. And yet this is the labor-backed Democratic candidate in Ohio who is trying to out-Trump Trump with his vicious anti-China racist language. And it's unacceptable, and yet he still refuses to pull off this racist ad. US and China are the two largest economies, the two largest trading partners. China bashing does nothing to organize US workers, to build labor solidarity, or to advance an agenda for economic justice, which is so desperately needed within the United States. And to align with US corporations and to say that China is the enemy is a betrayal to the US working class. So where do we go from here? The AFL-CIO should establish formal relationships with the All-China Federation of Trade Unions that represent more than 300 million union members in China. AFL-CIO President Liz Schuler, the first woman in history to lead the AFL-CIO, has the ability to make this happen and to establish this relationship. We should develop union-to-union and worker-to-worker partnerships to advance mutual interests, to strengthen worker rights, to advance climate change policies, and especially now to work together in the midst of the pandemic. Close to 1 million people have died from COVID-19, many because of Trump's lies and failed policies, and due to opposition to vaccination and corporate greed. Less than 5,000 people have died from COVID-19 in China, less than 5,000 people. What can we learn from this experience? As I said, this is weekend is the 30th anniversary of Apollo. We have a new publication, Asian American Workers Rising, and there's a special chapter that talks about the Apollo role in building global labor solidarity. And we are currently embarking on a national campaign against anti-Asian hate that will focus on, number one, building political power, especially in this critical midterm election year. Number two, to advance immigrant rights and to secure full rights for the 11 million undocumented immigrants who are relegated to an apartheid-like existence within the United States. And three, to build multiracial unity to fight racism and to fight white supremacy. So we really thank the organizers of today's gathering for inviting me to share my presentation today. And we really hope that we can continue not only strengthening cross-border solidarity between our sisters and brothers in Canada and in the US, but indeed to together find ways of opposing the Cold War politics that have been a dominant feature and are still seeing its impact even with the war in Ukraine. So we hope that today's conversation will be the beginning of many more fruitful conversations to truly build global labor solidarity. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ken. And I just want to really say some of the things that are sitting with me right now. You know, you just said 300 million unionized workers in China, and that's an astronomical number. Part of that is because of the labor law reform that happened in the 90s that made it so that a unionization drive required 20 workers. At the time, I'm not sure if that's still the right number, but 20 workers to sign on to indicate their desire to become unionized, and that the employer was required then to recognize. And so this brings me to the first question, and I will just pause to invite people to put your questions into the chat function, and Xingying and I will, as time allows, put those forward, but we'll start with one from each of us. So I wondered if I could ask for you to speak to the independence of the All China Federation of Trade Unions from the government of China, because this is a question that does come up in Canadian unions about some will question the legitimacy of their, you know, are they a real union, is part of the conversation that we hear from time to time. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that specifically.
Thank you. So number one, yes, they are a real union. Are they a union like the Canadian Labour Congress or like the AFL-CIO? No. Do they have the right to strike? No. Do they have collective bargaining rights? Limited. And do they have a different approach when it comes to labor relations? Absolutely. In many ways, the All China Federation of Trade Unions functions more like a hybrid between a government organization that advances workforce development, health and safety, protections for workers on the job, as well as one that represents the interests of workers. So are they the same as unions in the US and Canada? Absolutely not. Yet the ACFTU predates the founding of the People's Republic of China. The founding of the ACFTU predates the founding of the Communist Party of China. They have over 300 million members, and on virtually every workplace that has a union in China, you will have a union office on the work site, and you will have staff for that union office who are dedicated, and I guarantee you they're dedicated to serve the interests of the workers within their union. That's what they're there for. They're there to protect and defend the interests of workers. And anywhere you go to in China, when you talk to a union leader, that's what they'll tell you. In China, according to the World Bank, that hotbed of radical reporting and research, says that 850 million people have been lifted from poverty in China. 850 million people have been lifted from China, and that in 1981, 88% of the people in China lived in extreme poverty, and it has dropped dramatically with 850 million people lifted out of poverty. So I challenge people to say that the role of unions in China has not played a role in lifting workers out of poverty. And I think that this refusal to have any dialogue, communication, contact, which has been the policy of the AFL-CIO, has been a huge disservice in not providing opportunities for us to learn from what is going on in China, what we like and what we don't like about what's going on, because I'm not saying that their structure is what we want in the United States, but I think that we need to understand their structure in regard to the context and history of China.
Thank you. Over to Xin-Ying for the next question.
Ken's answer was very insightful for us to understand the organization of the All China Federation of Trade Unions and its relation to the government. Thank you, Kent. The second question is, you have talked about racism and anti-Asian violence in the United States. It does not happen in America alone. We have seen racism and anti-Asian attacks on the rise throughout Canada as well. So how does worker solidarity in North America address the concerns?
That's a great question, Xin-Ying. And I really want to give a shout out to our sisters and brothers in the Asian Canadian Labor Alliance, who have been working in solidarity with APALA for many years. And I do think that there again, cross-border solidarity can play a role in supporting policies and campaigns that oppose racism and white supremacy. Unfortunately, the American labor movement, the AFL-CIO, is a product of the long legacy of U.S. imperialism and U.S. capitalism, and so it is not a surprising thing that the AFL-CIO historically has embraced many policies of segregated unions and of exclusion of women, exclusion of people of color, and have embraced Cold War and pro-US government and pro-US military policies that have caused great damage to workers in other parts of the world. The AFL-CIO used to fly up Contras from Central America to provide training at the George Meany School. They used to mobilize support for the U.S. war of aggression in Vietnam, and they used to they gave the Human Rights Award to Chief Buthelezi, the chief rival of Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, because of Nelson Mandela's ties to the South African Communist Party. So this is part of our collective history that we can't ignore, and we need to, especially now when the anti-China sentiment is directly resulting in a spike in anti-Asian violence in the US, we can't be silent when this happens. And we need to build political power. We need to build multiracial unity to stand up in support of Black Lives Matter. And we also need to advance the rights of immigrant workers that are being viciously attacked throughout the United States. And President Biden, unfortunately, is still implementing some of the racist anti-immigrant policies of the Trump administration. We need to challenge that. We need to change that. And I think that as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, we have to be very committed to continue this fight for racial and economic justice. And we know that this is a fight that we cannot take on ourselves. And so it is critical to build multiracial unity and to build working class solidarity to fight for racial and economic justice.
Thank you. I'm just scanning the questions that have come in. A couple of them are questioning about communist-controlled unions not being democratic. I think you've already touched on that. So I'm going to go to the next one, which is, what is unionizing like in China, and how is it different from the United States? And I would say Canada, because there's some similarities there. What lessons can we learn from how unions work in a place like China? And do you think that there's a fundamental difference in unions from a country based in a communist governance versus Western capitalist governance? So you talked about them, we have to recognize that they are representing the interests of workers, but in a different way than we're used to. So if you could just highlight some of that. And I'll just ask actually, no, I'll leave it for after. Xinying needs a question too.
Those are great questions. And what I want to encourage people to do is go to China, travel to China, meet with union members, meet with union leaders, and find out for yourself. And so many of the main critics of unions in China have never been to China. And I think it's a missed opportunity. I have traveled to Vietnam to meet with unions and workers of Vietnam. I have traveled to Cuba to meet with unions and workers of Cuba. And each and every opportunity is very helpful in getting a better understanding. Clearly, unions that are in socialist countries have a very different history, a very different role. In China, the unions are not involved in fomenting worker unrest, promoting strikes, promoting work stoppages, because in their view, that is not the most effective way to win gains for the Chinese working class. So from our vantage point of US labor movement, we see them as, well, they're sold out. They're betraying the Chinese working class because they're not organizing strikes and they're not fighting against the corporate leaders the way we are fighting corporate leaders in the US. Well, there may be some truth to that. On the other hand, as I indicated, 850 million Chinese workers have been lifted out of poverty. So they must be doing something right if the World Bank says that 850 million workers have been lifted out of poverty. I wish in the US we could claim that the American labor movement has been as successful at lifting our workers out of poverty. So, I think that the structure, the form, the role of unions in China is very different. And it's not necessarily something that we want to embrace in terms of how we want to build unions or how we want to organize workers. Organizing is much easier in China. You don't have the fierce opposition from multinational corporations that you do in the United States. How could it be that over 100 Walmarts are organized and represented by unions in China, and 0 in the United States? It's like, let's find out why, and let's bring this message back to the Walmart corporate leadership and say, why is it that you are willing to recognize unions in China and you won't give the basic right to workers in the United States? What's wrong with this picture? And why don't we bring unionized workers from Walmart stores to help to organize Walmart workers in the United States to talk about the benefits of being part of a union? So, if we start with this oppositional framework that China is bad, they're communist, that there's no democracy, that there's no freedom, we have nothing to learn from them, then we are missing the boat. And if we embrace the kind of campaign that Trump does, that now Tim Ryan in Ohio is, saying that US corporations are not the problem is China, they're taking our jobs. And if we just can bash China, and if we can somehow undo the fact that China and the US are the 2 largest trading partners in the world and are the 2 largest economies in the world, and if we can go back to protectionism and stop any trade between the US and China, that's going to save US jobs and save the US labor movement, I think that's a failed strategy. But, I think that this debate needs to take place in terms of what is the vision for the US labor movement to organize US workers, and are our interests served by embracing a Cold War anti-China policy?
I also remember when we had a delegation in China, it was when the Walmart had just organized, and we were told that it was not done in an easy way. It was having to have 2 and 3 a.m. in the morning meetings with workers in a clandestine way, because there was an assumption that, well, the government would just approve this, but that was not in fact the case. They had to organize as difficult as it has been in anywhere else. So thank you for that. I'm going to turn it over to Xinying for the next question.
Thank you, Kent, for the answer. And the next question is from the audience. Are there income benefits or paid sick days widely available to workers in China now in quarantine and the lockdowns? If not, are there union or community campaigns to provide them?
We've had fascinating meetings with union leaders and union activists in China who have reported on other public health crises. And so how they have addressed the challenge of SARS several years ago, how they have addressed the AIDS crisis a few years ago. And I was so deeply moved and inspired by the courage and heroism and determination of Chinese workers and Chinese union members who went to great lengths to care for, to support, and to stand in solidarity with people who had contracted AIDS, had contracted SARS. And there was a powerful spirit of community building that I saw unions in China promoting. So, I see the coverage in the United States so outrageously one-sided and attacking anything that goes on in China with regard to COVID and the communist draconian shutdowns of Shanghai and Beijing. And this totalitarian government is stripping the rights of workers of China, and it's causing widespread food shortages and hardships. I'm sure there's some truth to the food shortages and the widespread hardship that any lockdown results in. I want to have a serious and thoughtful conversation on whether the laissez-faire, anti-vax, anti-mask wearing policies that were promoted by the Trump administration that directly contributed to close to 1 million deaths, whether that is a good thing and whether we uphold that as the defense of democracy. So in democracy, you don't have to be vaccinated, you don't have to wear masks, and you can freely share your virus with anyone you want to, because that's our right in a democratic society. I question whether that is the true democracy that we want to uphold. And I question why, in spite of the fact that there have been less than 5,000 reported deaths based on COVID-19 in a country of 1.3 billion, why is it that there is not more interest in learning how China effectively managed COVID-19 to this date? It may change, it may get worse, it may, the statistics may grow in terms of the death rate, but I think that it's worth examining. And I think it would be great if public health union leaders in our two countries got together to learn from one another on how they managed the COVID-19 crisis.
I think we just have time for one last question, and it's really kind of a continuation of what you were just saying. The question is this: given that these histories of imperialism, racism, and anti-communism in the labor movement, I'd love to hear more about the concrete areas for collaboration that Kent mentioned earlier, like climate change, so topic-based issues of collaboration. What promise do you see in these issues that are also challenges within the North American labor movement? So, the areas that we have conflict within our own labor movements, and what are the opportunities for us to collaborate with Chinese trade unionists on some of these issues that we are struggling with?
Well, from my vantage point, we are committed to developing global labor solidarity everywhere. So, we have extensive partnerships with our Canadian sisters and brothers, with our Mexican sisters and brothers. We're in the process of launching 3 new labor centers in Mexico, and to work with our colleagues and our union partners there. We have developed exchanges with Japan, with Okinawa. So, we're very committed to doing global labor exchange everywhere. I think that it is such a missed opportunity for the 2 largest economies in the world, the US and China, the 2 largest trading partners in the world, US and China, for the AFL-CIO to still maintain a Cold War policy of no exchange, no discussion, no meeting, no formal relationship with the largest labor movement in the world. And on the issue of climate change, I think it is worth people visiting what is happening. I visited the BYD plant in Shenzhen, China, and I was amazed at the level of use of electric buses and electric cars, how the entire city has been planned around trying to limit greenhouse gas emissions and to reduce the carbon footprint and to reduce oil burning cars. And, again, I'm not saying that this is a panacea or that this is a worker paradise. There are many, many problems in China. There are many human rights abuses. There are many problems that, the Uyghur community faces. There are absolute issues in Hong Kong and Taiwan that we may never agree upon with China. However, I think that on the issue of climate change, that it is such a missed opportunity if the US and China at multiple levels, worker to worker, union to union, NGO to NGO, government to government, does not engage in a constructive dialogue on how can we work together to stem the threat of climate change to the future of our planet. The Chinese people care about this issue because it impacts everybody. The people in the United States, the people in Canada, we are all on the same planet. And wouldn't it make sense for us to have a conversation about advanced lessons and practices in greening our economies and in eliminating the use of fossil fuels? What can we do collectively to green our planet and to advance policies that will improve the lives of workers throughout the globe? Multinational corporations will never do that. Multinational corporations have led us to the brink of disaster time and time again, to war, to famine, to environmental degradation. That is the history of imperialism. That is the history of capitalism. So let us build worker to worker, union to union solidarity to address and to promote the solutions that we desperately need.
Okay, well, that's one that certainly screams out for collaboration. The whole climate emergency, just transition, and all of the issues that are embedded in all of that. I think that brings us really to the end of our time, but there's so much there to think about and to continue the conversation. And certainly the strategies that you just talked about, acknowledging that there are some real political issues there that we would have strong disagreement about, but as there are with our own governments is also true. And the strategy reminds me of the Industrial Areas Foundation work, where you essentially say, let's leave everything we disagree with on the doorstep, because what we need to do is focus on what we can agree on and then start working towards solutions. So I'm going to turn it now and just to personally say thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your thoughts on this with us, and such a wealth of information to think about, and turn it to Xinying for a closing. Thank you.
We have received so many questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get to them all. Thank you so much, Kent, for sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you for the wonderful presentation and for responding to audience questions. It's been a wonderful evening. We have come to the close of the event. Thank you to our audience. Thank you again to the sponsors and to the organizers of this informative and timely event. Thank you all. That's the end of the session. Goodbye, everyone.